Okay, so we're ready to start with the second block of the Dollhouse Block of the Month project. Once again, I'm going to cut out all my pieces, my applique pieces, using the reverse design. I'm going to use a stabilizer, fusible web. And so for that I need all of the design reversed, so I can trace that onto my fusible. And then I'm going to start by, I've already cut my block, my background block. I've cut it a couple of inches larger than what it says in the pattern. And I'm going to go ahead and start laying down some registration marks to guide me as to the placement of the applique pieces. However, because this is reversed, to lay down the registration marks, I do need to turn the design over so that the design will come through on the right side, and then I can proceed to lay down my registration marks. And I'm going to use my light box for this to see through. Before that, just a word about light boxes. This was a gift, was made for me, which I would like because of the size. I can lay really large blocks like this one down. There are also commercial ones that you can purchase if you want. I know that some people use a glass table or something and lay a light underneath. But another option, if you have a tablet of any kind, is to download an app. There are several in the, at least I know about the Apple Store, there's several that you can download. Like in this one is called Lightbox Trace. So when you open it up, you do have this option. It's got several options actually, but you have this option to use a white screen. And when you do that, if you lay it down, then it's pretty easy to see. And you can just trace. I don't know if you can see this on camera, but then you can trace on top. So this is an option, actually a very easy option if you do have any kind of tablet. I hope that is a useful tip then. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and start laying down my registration marks and kind of lay down my fabric so that it's centered. Okay, and if you remember, if you look at the original design, we start with the table's kind of in the center. The machine is oriented towards the way it should be, towards the left. And our chair is also oriented towards the left. And so I'm going to start just laying down some registration marks. Once again, I'm using this Applique pencil that I really like because you can, it's got a very fine tip. It lays down a very clear mark, but it's very easy to erase it even just by rubbing it. So it's not going to stain the fabric. So what you want to do, once again, is just lay down a few. You don't have to trace out the whole design. You just want a little bit of the outline to guide you when it comes to placing your pieces. And remember, anything that's going to lie under another piece, it isn't really useful to lay down a registration mark because that's going to get covered. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and lay down all my registration marks, and then I will come back and we'll proceed from there. Okay, so I've prepared my pieces and I'm ready now to start appliquing them down. If you remember from the very first block, this is the fusible product that I like to use because it can be repositioned. However, you will notice that this is, I guess, a letter size sheet, and we do have a couple of pieces here, this table and the tabletop, I guess, that are too long. They're longer than the 11 inches here. So for these two pieces, I did choose to use some Wonder Under. Okay, and the only disadvantage to this is that I won't be able to reposition, so I just have to be careful when I lay this down to have it in the exact same spot, correctly, and then iron it down, press it down. All the other pieces I've used the Applistick for, and so it will be easier to position them, and if I need to move them around, that will be easy to do. Then a couple of things that I'd like for you to notice is, in some of the pieces, for example this one here, you will notice in the pattern that this is numbered as one piece, the stand. However, you don't need to necessarily cut it all as one long piece. You can just cut this tip if you want separately, okay? Or you can cut the whole piece out, whichever way you like. Then other things to note are this trash can here. What I'm going to do here is I'm going to first embroider all these lines, because this is supposed to be a see-through type of trash can, so I will embroider these lines first and then I will applique the top and bottom piece. Something else to note is the scissors here. These scissors, I did the exact same thing that I did in the first block with some of those itty bitty tiny pieces, and I drew out the scissors first and colored. I did this on a piece of white fabric and then colored it in and then cut the piece out. And that's easier than to try to cut all these little pieces. So that will be easier to applique. The spool too, this was cut from just one piece and then the thread was colored in. Okay. Now, I think that the only kind of tricky part in this block is this part of the sewing machine. And your pattern, you will see that I've laid it out as different pieces, but they really are really, really tiny. So here what I did was I cut out kind of this bottom section right here. Okay, and I will applique it, and I drew it also using fabric paints. So I drew it, and so I will first applique that, and then I will lay down these other little pieces that go on top, and I will applique them separately. Okay, because you also want to give these some depth. Okay, so just embroidering would appear a little bit flat. The needle I will embroider, and the same as in the pincushion, the pins will be embroidered with a French knot for the pin head. Okay. The other thing here in the iron, what I did do was this is also in the pattern it appears as a separate piece, but I made this one and I just drew on top to give it a different coloring. And then there is another little piece that goes here that is actually also very, very small, so I will choose to embroider that instead of appliquing it. Then the other thing to notice is for the jar, you could try to applique all those, but they're very, very tiny pieces. So in this case, I've looked for my tiniest buttons, and I'm going to sew these on, and then I will embroider the sides of the jar to give it a feel of being a transparent jar. And that's pretty much the most complicated part of this block. The fabrics, once the fabrics are appliqued too, then you will see on the pattern piece that it tells you to embroider certain lines to give them a little bit of definition. That's it. So I'm going to start appliquing, and I'll come back and show you my progress. And so here is the finished block. So just to recap a few things, with the scissors, I painted onto a piece of white fabric that was already stabilized with the fusible web. And then on this one I used a zigzag stitch to go over kind of the entire width and also around the handles of the scissors. I used I hand embroidered the lines on the trash can. Okay, and then the trickiest part of this block, which was the handle of the sewing machine, these pieces, this little brown piece, the yellow here, and this piece were all painted also onto a piece of white fabric and appliqued, and then the handle and the wheel were appliqued separately. On the iron, this was cut out as one piece, including the button up here, but then this was painted afterwards, the darker color. And then this button down here was embroidered. The other thing to note was in the end I decided to use beads instead of buttons on the button jar. So the lines were outlined, were embroidered, hand embroidered to outline the jar, and then these seed beads were stitched on by hand too. So that in a nutshell is the second block of our Dollhouse Block of the Month project. This was an easier block to do than the first one, and I hope that you are successful in sewing it too. I hope you've enjoyed this.